the Oregon Department of Education. My position supports career and college readiness and school counseling programs across the state. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm coming into this meeting really energetic. I love standards work and just really interested to see where we go on this kind of adventure together. And so that's kind of the reason why I'm a part of this group and helping Vanessa to facilitate the work. And so just excited. Is my weather report. Just excited to be here.
I'll go. Jill Bryant with Portland Public Schools, she, her pronouns. Weather report. I don't know, it seems like today's weather is kind of it, slightly bright clouds. They're not dark and oppressive, but not, bright and cheery. So somewhere in between. No, keep the energy up, Beth. Low energy for me. Let's see why. Sorry, I need to move. Sorry. Why standards? I guess the SEL standards I'm most nervous about. They have the potential to really cause the most harm for our students, in particular our non-white students. So, and it's probably my least favorite group I wanted to be on, but I feel that they're so important that I put myself on the group.
I can go next. So my name's Chelsea Vukovic. I work for Sherwood School District. I'm our behavior and mental health coordinator. And so within that role, all of our SEL work falls under that position. So she, her pronouns. So in terms of, so weather report, I would say, I feel like I'm the one on the far left. It's like the sunshine, but clouds in front of it. And I say that because this week has been busy, but our district put in a staff wellness day tomorrow. So I have a long weekend because we have Friday off and then Monday's the holiday. So I'm like, I feel like there's some sunshine peeking through. And then in terms of why I chose this standards group, I feel like, unlike Jill, I'm super excited for it. This has been the work we've been doing in our district. I have been writing most of our SEL lessons and pulling together curriculums and we started at the elementary level and we're trying to take it up to secondary. So I am just super excited to have some like standards across the board and feel less like I'm making it up on my own for us here in Sherwood. So that's exciting for me.
I can go next. I'm Jim Hansen. My pronouns are he and him. They, them also works. So either of those sets of pronouns is just fine. I work 3 days a week as the school psychologist at Lincoln High School in Portland Public Schools, and 1 day a week for PPS Student Success and Health as the program coordinator for school-based dialectical behavioral therapies. My weather report is sunny because I had forgotten we have a holiday on Monday, and now I'm all excited that I have another day off. So that's great. I can use the rest in recuperation. I think one of the reasons that I'm committed to this work is for many years, I did coordinate our MTSS at Lincoln High School, so well over a decade. And we had a great set of standards from the Department of Education, the health class standards that also dealt with SEL. And we could use those standards very flexibly. They worked at Tier 1 for our suicide prevention programs and for our anti-bullying and social justice programs. So great content. Also, we were able to use those same standards at tier 2 and tier 3. For example, our dialectical behavioral skills classes are based on those standards. So I loved not only that they were developmental, but also that they were comprehensive and that they could be used on all tiers. So one of my fears is that our standards would be far too circumscribed and would not be flexible enough to truly handle the evidence-based programs that we could bring in for anti-bullying, for equity, for suicide prevention. I just feel like we need to have standards that will be up to the job for a fully developed MTSS system in schools. And that's why I'm here.
Kate, I don't want to have to put you on the spot if you haven't checked the agenda yet, but I would be the last to go unless you're ready. I can
No,
jump.
and
in.
I as soon as I saw the agenda pop back up in the chat, I went there to see what we were all, and I think I've got the gist too. I heard a couple people, and I'm finished eating my peanut butter now, so
Nice.
that's the better time. Yeah, so my name is Kate Shively. I use she, her pronouns. I work with Canby School District. I'm currently the counselor on special assignment there. Prior to that, I was a middle school counselor and still doing that this year too, but also a high school counselor. My personal weather report, we're having a when it rains it pours week. So we've got a broken down car, a furnace that we've discovered we're gonna need to replace. So we're just having one of those weeks, but it makes other things just seem like not a big deal. So I think that's just where we're at right now. So yeah, that's not even work related. That's just that's just life. And then I chose to be in the standards group because I think I heard this a little bit too from Chelsea, but like think about the application of SEL in schools. Obviously that is very applicable to my job and something we've been working on, especially in Canby District, trying to align those things and make sure there is an actual like curriculum. And so I think that's the part where I feel the most knowledgeable, but also I feel probably the most strongly about wanting to make sure. And I didn't hear Jill's, and I'm bummed about that, but the same thing Jim's saying, we want to have enough structure, but not too much structure at the same time, so it can be flexible. So yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I can go next. Vanessa Martinez, she, her, hers pronouns, the SEL specialist. I think today is my full month on the position. I feel like I've been here for years. My personal weather report today's probably kind of like what's happening. Some gray clouds, but also some blue sky. And, I was telling Beth, I feel really tired today, low energy. And then I just always think, yeah, it seems to always happen on Thursdays because by Friday, I just like something comes up again where I feel like I can get through it. So yeah, kind of in the gray a little bit today. And then I chose to be on the standards group because, well, first of all, I think it's important to have a liaison for each of the groups. And so that's really kind of what I see my role here is supporting and connecting some dots with all of our different work groups and surfacing things and getting feedback because we do get the luxury of being in these spaces with all of you. And then beyond that, I resonate with a lot of what you all said. I think there's tremendous possibility and I'm encouraged about what can happen with SEL standards, but equally also nervous about the potential for harm. So just navigating those two at the same time and the tension between that, I think is something we will need to be exploring together. So with that, thanks again for all of you and all of your weather patterns and how you're showing up today. Kate, I hope things get a little bit sunnier for you. There's a 3-day weekend, and for us, for some of us, Chelsea, I wish all districts were doing that, right? Extending the weekend a little bit is a nice gift, the gift of time. Okay, so we're gonna move through And these are just some of the intentions for our time today. So if you have other things that you want to bring up or make sure we talk about in the agenda, please, this is very flexible. This is just an initial draft to get us going. But we thought we would share, and I don't know, maybe we could do a thumbs up. Like, how are you all feeling in terms of the milestones document and how it correlates with the standards piece? Is that something that you want to look at together today to get grounded in, or do you all feel like, hey, I've seen that enough, I'm feeling good about it, we don't need to spend the time kind of orienting ourselves in the, you know, the larger scope of the work? So I'm curious. Jim is kind of in the middle, I see. Middle. Chelsea, I see that too. Middle. Okay, so I'm guessing that maybe just like a little like a little dipstick, go in a little bit, but not spend too much time on that. Does that sound okay? Okay.
Yeah, I just need to focus in on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've looked at it, but just like get my mind into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then like I said earlier, we're in the kind of the luxury spot of being, we're not first on the milestones plan. So we get to really think about what are the things that we want to be attentive to when we think about standards for Oregon. So we'll kind of have a general conversation today. And then the engagement group is in fierce mode, creating questions already to get some initial input. And so I think it might be helpful for that team to hear from the standards group. Like, is there anything specific or questions that you're thinking of that you think would be helpful for the team to kind of consider as we get into the engagement part of our work? So making space for that. Okay. Does that sound okay? Is there anything else that anybody wants to add or? Okay. So I'm going to kick it off to Beth, who's going to just check in on scheduling.
Perfect time for your baby to say hello. Yeah, so the standards, we were just going to let you know, it was really difficult to try to get, like, we know there's a lot of interest, but there wasn't a lot of responses for the standards group. So we just wanted to offer it out for just to put it back out there for people that are interested, but you all had responded with interest. So I'm glad that we're glad that you're here. We also were having trouble locking in a time for the meetings. So we wanted to try to plan for the future and get it on people's calendars and figure out what's going to work. So we just were going to see if, forward thinking of like the best week of the month or weeks of the month that would work for you all. And then the kind of like the time frame. And we just wanted to have that as a quick discussion, just to see what works best while we're all here. So just to give you an idea, the planning team will normally meet on the first and third week of the month. Engagement looks like they're doing great with it looks like the second and the third week of the month. So just wanting to try to get a feel for what works for the standards, and then we'll also be figuring out what's going to work for the framework group too. So is there like 2 different weeks that might work better for you all? So just know that on the 4th week is typically when we meet for our larger advisory group meeting, and forward thinking, we just want to try to have some time if there's anything, to prepare or to do before those larger group meetings that you all would be able to have time to do that.
I don't have any week, especially if it's on Thursdays. I don't necessarily have weeks that are better. Next week we have we're going into negotiations, and I'm on our negotiations team. So I'm out all day on that Thursday. So that's just a one-off thing. But for me, I can do any of those first through third weeks typically.
Okay. So so how, okay, thumbs up. So how it would be the second and third week of the month, and if we just roll that through June, would that make sense? And then if we did the Thursday, kept it on the Thursday, would that work? Jill, how is that looking for you? I'm seeing some nods, but
I'm just looking here.
I know, yes.
I know for me that should typically work, with the exception March 3rd, I am in interviews all day, but otherwise I typically have this time on Thursdays available.
Okay. So second and third week on the Thursdays, potentially. Jill's looking ahead. And then the time frame, what's so if we did an hour and a half block for meeting, we felt like that was like a good chunk of time to kind of like get into some stuff. Do you want to keep it the midday time? Jim's nodding. That works for you.
This time works for me. I have a standing meeting from 9 to 10 on Thursdays and another from 12:30 to 2. So
Okay.
I feel like that kind of, that's part of why Thursdays works. They're kind of like a meeting day. So
Okay.
Mostly this time and day works. I have a few conflicts, but probably can work around them.
Okay. Just so you all know, we'll continue to record for those that can't be here. We also have all the meeting, the notes and anything that needs to be done. We'll make sure that's being communicated out too, if there's like anything in between. Vanessa will also be helping, we'll be providing, we talked about yesterday, kind of doing like a weekly or bi-weekly update of how things are progressing for the larger group, so everybody kind of knows. So we'll have that as well. So if there's any reason you have to miss any of you for any thing going on, conflict, we'll just make sure that you're up to speed on things. And we're also happy to meet separately as well. So we've been doing that on the side. Okay, so it sounds like we got the dates. That's excellent. Good. All right, so we just wanted to do a quick review and just get ourselves reoriented to the work. And I know we spent our first larger meeting and a second kind of going over the House bill, but we just wanted to kind of bring it back to the House bill. So you'll see in the agenda, it's there. Just wanted to give you a moment to just refresh on section 4, which is the social-emotional learning standard framework, and page 6. Because of in there, it spells out like groups that we want to address with standards and frameworks, but it doesn't prescribe how we go about it. So that is going to be left for this group to decide how we're going to go about doing the standards and what that will look like. Vanessa can also speak to that too. And we've been trying to get really clear what that means. And so we wanted to spend some time with you all to kind of talk about that in a little bit. So I will just hush for a moment. I'll let you all read. Does anybody need a little more time? Okay. And then the next link that you'll see in the agenda is our timeline, milestone, scope, and sequence. And so if you'll click on that one, what we've done is we created a grounding document for each of the different work groups. And so we've taken from what we've done for the other ones and put that in the top, and then very specifically called out what will happen with the standards group. And it looks like, Vanessa, do you want me to link the standards? When I clicked on it, it looked like it's taking us to, actually here, I'll put it in the chat. So please disregard the link that's in the agenda. I'm going to put the standards one here in the chat. There you go. This one should take us to the standards. So apologies for that. There we go. So we should be looking at the House Bill 2166 standards grounding page. And you can see, Vanessa, do you want to go through with everyone on that document? I just love how you that's great.
So I don't know about you all, but I am a visual person. I have a hard time conceptualizing how things fit together without seeing it like all come together on one page. So what this is attempting to do is to organize our thinking and our different work groups, and really determining what those milestones are for each of the work groups, when they have to happen, so that that will drive much of what the work groups are doing leading up to those milestones. So those milestones are the yellow stars, and you can see that each group has, right, their own milestones. And that's really to keep us on pace with a very, very tight timeline. And I think it's important just to see the scope of this, because while we're all doing our own work in our smaller work groups, right, we're all participating in a much larger team. And so it's really important that we keep to those milestones, because if we lose sight of those, then the next team can't really move forward. So, right, we really need to hold to that. And just want to acknowledge that there's stress with that, right? That it is very tight. And I think we want to be able to dream it up really big. And we also have to be realistic with what we have. So this kind of captures all of those moving pieces. And then down at the bottom in the blue, the timeline, those are all the actual meetings of the big AG group. So those are our monthly ones where we have all of us together. And those are really, and this was really insightful. Everyone has wonderful metaphors for how this can look, but those are the touch points. So that is where we get feedback, we provide information. We might say as this group, hey, we're feeling some tension around this. What do you all think? It's a sounding board and an opportunity to engage the whole group and determine next steps. So those are kind of the touch points where we all come together on our monthly meetings. And then you can see we all have that final report completed at the very end, and September 22nd is when we go in front of the state board and share the recommendations of the advisory at that point. So those are the moving pieces. And then let's look at the ones for standards specifically. So you'll see that we are really waiting right now for engagement to provide us some initial information. And so that group right now is working on both a qualitative and a quantitative way to gather some information that will help inform the work of standards and framework. So they're going to give us some input or some input, right? I'm trying to distinguish input from feedback. And then by March 28th, all of that will be shared so that the feedback sessions will have been conducted and shared at the March 28th meeting, which then will help inform the framework group. So the framework group will have an initial draft of what they're seeing, what themes, how they want to respond to that data. And then basically that's when the standards group starts also thinking about, now that the framework has a draft and we've seen that, what might the standards look like that are in response to that or aligned to elements of the framework. And you'll see that we really only have one opportunity to kind of share a draft of our thinking, our best thinking at that time on May 23rd. And then the engagement group will take it back to organizations, to our different stakeholders for feedback. Like, hey, is this fitting? Is it not? What are you seeing? So gathering some feedback around the standards, and then this group will look at that and then finalize the recommendations for the report. So any questions about the overarching big piece of it? Okay. And then what you see below is just a scope and sequence that helps us kind of see what needs to be done for each of the work groups and at what point. So the milestones are in yellow, and then the AG group on the far right is what is actually happening in that session. And we had a meeting with folks that could make it yesterday to help plan what those look like. And there was some really helpful information. We really want to spend the bulk of that time together. Like for instance, on February 28th is the engagement group is going to share a draft of their planning. And so that's a chance for us to talk through dialogue, ask questions, see what we're seeing, so that the engagement group can respond and then implement the plan. So that's really the space where that happens. And then as you scroll down even further, you'll be able to see who's on our team. So who has expressed interest in being on the team, their contact information, our meeting days and times, and then below you'll find our actual agenda that we're working from today. You'll find the meeting link, the Zoom link, and then also the recording to all of our meetings that we've had. So if you missed one, you can always go back and see our recordings, and then you'll get a sense of who was also attending, who attended the meeting. And then below that is some roles and responsibilities, which is kind of our next thinking is, we all have strengths, we all have ways to contribute to the team. So thinking about how do we want to organize ourselves internally? And so the way we were thinking of it, and these are all very, like if you all have a better idea or a different role that you're thinking of that would be necessary, we can totally change it up. We can change some of the responsibilities. We can do anything we want. But we thought it would be helpful to get us at least with some initial roles. So like, for instance, today, I'm wondering, would anybody be willing to be the note taker? So to take notes on our agenda, and that's really to capture for those that can't make it. Okay, Jim, timekeeper, awesome. I know. Speedy
That's
fingers.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Like, are these, and I was thinking about you knowing, like, I will not be at the 24th meeting, and some people, there's a longer list of emails than are here today.
Right.
Like, are these roles that would change from meeting to meeting and we'd set them every meeting? Because like, there are things I wouldn't mind doing, but I don't want to do them if I'm not going to be here.
Totally. Yeah. And that's up to you all. I mean, I will say some of the groups have decided that they want to do it on a rotating basis. And just at the start of the meeting, we just kind of populate who's going to do what for this meeting, depending on who's here. Others have decided they're just going to stay on for that role for the duration. Some of them have decided to do it like to do more than one person. So it's up to us. What do you all think?
I like the idea of just deciding each week, or maybe for the next week, the next meeting, who's going to do what, because of what Kate said about if we're not going to be here, and
Right.
distributing the load. And then
Okay.
also, like, in terms of the lead and creating the agenda, seems like we should co-create the agenda that at the end of each meeting.
And thanks for saying that, because that's a mistake here. It says co-create on all the other ones, but not on this one.
Gotcha.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Jim, since you kind of said you were going to do timekeeper, if you'd be willing to do that today, I would love for the last 15 minutes, if you could give us a time check at that point so that we can kind of shift into next agenda items, any kind of pre-work or next steps that we need to make. So I think for today, it would be helpful if, would someone be willing to be the note taker? Because I know Beth is gone and it's really hard for me to talk and take notes at the same time.
Is it just putting them into the agenda that was shared on that far right?
Yes, it's the
Okay.
agenda, the agenda that we're working from right now on the right,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that for today.
Thank you, appreciate it. Awesome. Yeah, and then we'll just make a note that we'll revisit this every time, like at the start of the meeting. Okay, so are there any other work group needs that you anticipate or things that would be helpful for our team as we get going?
I think I'm just curious if this is one of those days where just because it was short notice, people can attend. I'm wondering if that second and third Thursday works for the larger group. Like just the other folks that are in. I don't know if you have a feel, Vanessa, for.
Yeah, it was. I think it was, we have two other folks that said that they just couldn't make it today. So most everybody, we didn't get many to say that they wanted to be on the standards group, or they just didn't respond. So at this point, we have to move forward and we have to find a time. And so I'm just want to honor those that are here and can make it and have responded. And I think we'll just share what our initial thinking is. And if it's, I don't know. I guess it's hard because we can't accommodate all schedules. And we also can't force everybody to respond to the emails. So I feel a little bit at a loss. And I'm hoping that maybe if we have this solidified time, that it will work. And if not, there'll be other options asynchronously to contribute. Okay. So with that, let's dive in. So when we were thinking about standards and we were asking for folks at ODE, like, okay, there's this bill, there's this language, parts of it are really precise in the bill and parts of it are really not fleshed out at all, right? It says K-12 standards, and that's really about it for our part. So that leaves it very open. And with that openness can be good, and with that openness can bring up challenges. So we are all trying to interpret what this bill is saying. And we talked to some folks at ODE and they kind of helped us guide some essential questions for our work. And this was the one that we kind of landed on, which is, what should the standards include and how should we approach their development? So that's kind of our guiding question that we have right now to be thinking about as it relates to standards. So go ahead.
Just trying to understand that question. Where is that written?
It's on the agenda, item 8.
No, the question that you just said.
Yeah, it's on the agenda on number 8.
Oh, I'm looking on the,
Yeah.
I'm on the wrong.
You're probably on the grounding page.
I am. Sorry. Okay. There we go. I'm sorry, everybody.
Don't be sorry. There's a lot.
What should the standards include? How should we approach? Oh, you mean the development of the standards?
Development of the standards. Yeah.
What should the standards? Okay, thank you. Sorry.
No, I appreciate the pause because I've had to read it multiple times too. So I guess as you think about this, like what are our aspirations in terms of standards? And as you can see, we're also going to talk about what are our worries, what are our wonderings, because as a liaison, I can bring back like, hey, we still would love some guidance on this, you know. And then also, are there places that we want to look toward? Are there things that or standards you've seen or concepts that you feel are important for us to consider? You all have tremendous expertise. And so that was kind of our thinking for today. And we could muddle them all up. If you want to go straight to worries, you can go straight to worries. But just to capture kind of like, how are we making sense of this right now?
I have thoughts that aren't very organized, so glad we're recording. Yeah. Because I think one of the things as I was reading the bill too, like they do list out a lot of perspectives to make sure that a lot of perspectives are included. And so part of my, I guess it's a wondering is just, I'm really curious to see what engagement comes back with to make sure that we are covering all of those and making sure that we're coming up with standards that don't just fit like one particular culture, but can be applicable to all things. And so I'm a little excited and curious to see what they come back with. And I know for me doing that, I did that state activity just on my own and looking at some other states, saw some really wonderful organizational rubrics of how they broke it down. So here are the standards, but here's what like developmentally appropriate that looks like for this age group. And so I think possibly even taking some time to refer back to those and see if there is a certain way we, I don't know, as we think about the standards we want, like even just the organization piece, I think it'll be good to refer back to some of the things that are already in place because some people have made some beautiful charts. So I think those are just my initial thoughts.
It's funny, it's just starting to talk about this brings up just this tense in my gut. Like, I think just because, not that this is all about me, but these are my worries, I guess, just this fear of how these standards will be used. Like, I mean, Jim, you kind of mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but so like in Portland Public Schools, we're in a adoption process for the curriculum. So that, you know, as a district, we created the selection criteria of what we want to be represented in the SEL programs. So we have that. And then people are talking about SEL screeners in PPS. So then you have different screeners like I'm sure Jim, you know, these DESA. And so they all sort of have standards in a sense that they're created from. And then we have CASEL competencies. We have, you know, all sorts of things. And so one, how do we align them? So whatever we create will probably result in people having to trash what they've done because it won't address what was already been built. Or it will help people then, you know, choose curriculum, choose screeners, create professional learning. Do you know what I'm saying? I just like, my mind and all these elements, it makes me worried about that and wonder, how do we do it in a way that is aligned with these larger organizations and things that everybody's creating. And then just my other worry is thinking about some teachers wanting to use this, wanting to have SEL standards so that they can target kids' behavior, or say, see that you're not meeting that standard of X, Y, and Z, so therefore you're going to be, potentially punished. And then my last fear is that the standards are focused on the students, but then we all know it's the system and the adult that create the conditions for students to thrive. So how do we create them in a way that really also put pressure on the system and the adults? And then my last comment is just thinking, we've been putting out this district-wide professional learning, that these modules that staff are facilitating. And I was just reading some of the feedback, and there's some anger in the teachers saying, this is great, but the district is creating policies and systems that are harming us. So it's this tension. Like, we could create the system in our classroom, but let's look at what is the district doing that's countering that. So, so does that, hopefully some of that makes sense.
Jill, thank you for saying that. And would you mind expanding on that last piece a little bit more, as far as the difference between the classroom and the district? Because I think it's really important for us to hear.
You mean, okay, so what I was saying, really it's thinking about the being trauma informed. So if the district is, well, so like Chelsea, you said your district is giving you all a wellness day. Like, A, that could never happen in Portland Public because the News Oregonian would trash us. And B, it wouldn't happen because the district doesn't have that wellness at a stance. So if you have policies, relationships between the union and the district, the HR department, if all of those are causing harm and stress, then classroom teachers, school-based people, A, feel bitter, and B, feel like their hands are tied. Like, how am I going to create these conditions for wellness when I'm already feeling beat down by policies? What is it that resonates with you, Jim?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because it has a lot to do with implementation science. And that is feasibility and acceptability. We can't expect teachers or school counselors or social workers or other people to implement a program when it's not acceptable, when it's not feasible, and when the conditions aren't right. So I think it's a great consideration to say, how do we take staff wellness into consideration? One of the things that I would dream of for this work is that we do use the whole child model. So within that model, it does identify stakeholders, and staff wellness is a part of it. I know that we are kind of, in some ways, limited by the language of the bill, but that doesn't mean we can't do our own work in embedding these standards in context. So one of the things that came up at Lincoln when we were devising our Tier 1 SEL for our 9th graders was that the teachers simply did not feel ready and capable of presenting these social and emotional learning lessons. And that was a great eye opener to say, all right, we may do all of this work, Are we truly including and listening to the people that will be actually implementing what we're writing? So whole child model was very important to me. Really paying attention to the principles of implementation science is really important to me. And then again, to harken back, I think to some of the things that Kate and Chelsea have also mentioned. And that is representation. I mean, I feel fine being here as a queer person and saying, all right, well, maybe I can in some ways represent LGBTQI2S issues. And I'm 58 years old. I am not a 16-year-old. So there are going to be some different issues there. I was also thinking, okay, right off the bat, I can think of some of my good friends in the Native American community that I've worked with. For example, before we rolled out dialectical behavioral therapy at Lincoln, I went to one of our leading Native American organizations and spoke to them and spoke to their board and said, this is what we're planning on doing. Showed them the skills and said, what do you think? And I was able to solicit feedback and get their blessing for implementing DBT with Native American students. So I would just immediately, when we started to have this conversation, I can think of 2 people from the Native American community, 2 people from the African American community here that I would love to have in these discussions that we're having now, so that we can have them right here at the start as we move forward. And I'm not sure if that's possible, if there are more people that can be included in this particular work group, but that was one of my concerns. Well, the other concern is that in a lot of other states, these social and emotional standards are very limited. They are basically tier 1. They're designed to be taught by teachers, and it is lessons that go out and are taught to the kids. That's it. And that's just not the way that I see standards. In my introduction, I said, absolutely, that is one part of the design for standards is to be taught at tier 1, but not just in tier 1. I think, again, it really needs to inform our work in other evidence-based practices that come in, specific trauma-informed, strengths-based, and culturally relevant evidence-based programs that have been adopted or adapted, like DEI work, like anti-bullying work, like suicide prevention, like evidence-based mental health interventions at tier 2 and tier 3. So my concern, my greatest concern is that we'll have too narrow a view and that we will be irrelevant to people like health teachers and to mental health delivery. But we'll be just focused on tier 1. Those are, I was just kind of a stream of consciousness approach to telling you all of this. So I hope that some of that does make sense.
Well, I was gonna say one thought, lots of thoughts that I've had that I think Jim kind of goes off of that too narrow of a view. And I know, Jill, you kind of touched on this, is like you said, in Sherwood, we have a staff wellness day, and wellness is a term that our community is okay with, but I can tell you that it took a lot of time to get our community to where wellness was okay. And the word wellness works for our community, but other words are not going to work for us. And that's just, I think from my experience, in being one of 2 people that did the introduction of trauma-informed care and all of this in our district, and we have a culture of care at our elementary level, and we're working it up through secondary. But I think one is like, how do we write standards that allow for that flexibility in some of that language so that it can be specific to the community that it's in, but also really touching on that piece of the adult SEL and the system wide. I mean, that is something that again, I've been so blessed in Sherwood that they have taken this work and run with it. And we are a smaller district and we're able to do that. You know, like for me to have conversations with our superintendent and assistant superintendent on this, like I just have to walk across the hallway and they're ready to listen to me about it. That is not the case in every district, large or small. And so I think that we could write the best standards and come up with the best curriculum to address these standards. And if the system as a district and as a building is not in place, and Jim, you touched on too, like not just is the system there, but are the teachers ready to have these conversations? Because that's the other thing that I'm finding is the implementation of SEL work is greatly impacted by that teacher's views on it and how comfortable they are with hosting uncomfortable conversations. And so I do think that, and I don't know if that is this group or another group, but I think that that needs to be a big piece of this implementation. And I don't know if maybe that was necessarily on anybody's radar when they like wrote this bill and was like, yeah, it sounds great. Let's put some standards in place. But there's so much more to it.
Yeah, I myself have some wonderings, and I'm resonating with a lot of what is being said here. I think for me, I still wonder what we mean by even just the word standard. Like, what are we saying that standard is? And I'm also wondering, because my worry is that if we have a standard, then it typically, in normal ways of thinking about standards and teaching, then we teach to that standard. And then oftentimes it can lead to just like lessons, right? Moments of lessons. And I think what we're kind of all touching on is that it's way more complex than that. And we want it to be interconnected and interrelated with everything that's going on in the classroom. And then the adults, right? How are they feeling? What conditions have been created for the adults to be in a space where they can nurture that environment for their students? And so there's just a lot. So when I've been thinking a lot more, instead of like the standards themselves, like what would be the conditions that would allow for equitable standards to even be nurtured? Like what would have to be in place, or what are the things that would have to be cultivated intentionally to create that? So that's something I'm thinking of. And I also think standards can be very narrow, and in their narrowness, I just worry that then we lose sight of the potential of interrelatedness, you know, across the content areas, across settings, across K-12. You know, I think a lot about like mathematical practices, like the math standards. They're open, they're process-based, and they're also things that you can do and say and reflect on. So those are just some of the things I'm thinking about right now. Like, what do we even mean by a standard? And is there openness to thinking about what we mean by what a standard means? And then I think the piece about teachers is super key. I don't know how many are teachers in our group. And so I think about like anytime that we do something to someone, right, there's a tremendous potential for harm. So how are we involving teachers in this discussion? I think is going to be really critical to create buy-in and partnership in that work. Because if we don't have the teachers, then I don't know. It's going to be pretty hard. Yeah, Jim.
I appreciate your summary, Vanessa. It's really helpful. And I want to make sure that we don't think just about the standards in the classroom. I like what you said about coordination. because as we also bring in programs like restorative justice, collaborative problem solving, or DBT, I think that that needs to be a part of the discussion, the tier 2 and tier 3, where kids might not be specifically in their classroom to receive some of those services. And also what we're saying about teachers and teacher training. Do we consider like training in RJ, training in collaborative problem solving as a part of the standards work that we're doing? Those are some fine trauma-informed, strength-based approaches, and I just want to make sure that they get mentioned in our discussion.
I think I too, and like thinking about representation, one of the things that we do represent with this, and I know we all hope to pull people forward in what we need to have happen, is that there are districts, mine included, that SEL is now a bad word, and we have parents actively fighting SEL. And so like, I like the aspirations, we want to bring all these other things in, but a lot of these districts, you start talking about DBT, you start talking about all these other things that they don't understand, families don't understand, communities don't understand. I think I worry that we're going to bite off more than we can chew here and not like get the work done around SEL that we need to. SEL, it's a bunch of different things, but I think we also have to remember that not everyone is where we are in this work and in the readiness for it. Not even teachers. We're talking about communities too. And so as I guess as I'm sitting here listening, like restorative practices have come up in our district, and it's a no. You know, like it is we're not ready for that. Community's not ready for that. So I guess I kind of want to remind us of that too. Like we're representing a lot of things, including people not ready for a lot of things. So I get excited about this because we have an opportunity to do some SEL work that really needs to happen. I don't know if that means we're going to get everything done that we would like on our wish list, because that's just not where everyone may be. So it's a thought I'm having as we're talking about this. It's like, I think this work is going to feel incredibly overwhelming if we're trying to include everything in it, because it already feels overwhelming as it is. It's not like there's not a full thought there. It's just a thought I'm having as I'm listening.
Kate, thank you for that. And I just want to make a connection because yes, it is overwhelming, and we do have impact, right? We are gathering, we are thinking through, we are going to share our best thinking. I think some of this, what we're talking about, will be taken by the framework group. So just because I'm part of the framework group, and so is Beth, we have been having conversations there about what are these other components that are so critical for SEL to happen with students, which is really what our charge is here. And so just wanting to say that has been mentioned, like teachers, wellness, district, conditions, all of those things are things that perhaps the framework will provide and structure to kind of show that it's complex and deep and very connected work.
Yeah, and Kate, that's a great point. I mean, you know, I'm living in my Multnomah County bubble. A great point in the sense of like, you know, what states are outlawing SEL, and then even in our own state, which counties are going to resist it. And so how do we create this in a way that it could be, well, just not so scary, but gets at exactly at what we want. And then also because of that, it can't be used to harm kids. And the other thought I had, is somebody defining SEL? Because that seems like before we can come up with standards, we have to decide how are we defining it?
So I asked that question because that's just where my brain went is, well, wouldn't we all start with some common shared definitions? And when I asked that of those that are helping us implement the bill at ODE, they said, no, that through this process, we are going to be defining that. So through the framework and through the standards.
And I don't think we can articulate standards till we know what we're talking about. Because if we actually define SEL, then that will help us define standards. So if we're saying SEL is about, the 5 SEL competencies, and that's all it is, then out will come the standards that teach social awareness. But if we're defining SEL with the transformative SEL piece, I don't know if you've all read what Castle has around transformative SEL, we're focusing on identity, agency, belonging, are central, then that will also impact our standards. If we define it as for youth and adults, anyway, I just don't know how we could go forward without defining it, not to create a barrier, but.
I'm wondering, Jill, as you're mentioning that, I'm wondering if that is something to bring back to the larger group to say like, hey, during our standards work group, we've discussed like really needing to define what social emotional learning is first. So that would be like something to like elevate to them in the larger group meeting and then work towards developing a definition around that. Something to think about.
Glad that you brought that up, Jill. I agree. And I think that really does have a lot to play with the feasibility and acceptability in whatever community that we happen to be in. So I think caution and work at the front as far as the definition is going to be very important, as well as having standards that can be applied in conservative communities and in communities that are ready for it. We don't want to prejudice those communities that are more conservative, and we don't want to hold back the communities that are more ready for social and emotional learning programs. That's going to be a tough task.
Hey, Kate, what just from in your particular context, why is SEL, what is it about SEL that's the bad word? What's the fear?
So SEL is the bad word. There's a pamphlet now going around, which is fantastic. And I think, I'm trying to remember, there were so many things that were listed on that pamphlet too, but I think that it's essentially, they're saying that schools are like pushing some kind of progressive agenda. And this is a way to like kind of brainwash kids into like certain ways of thinking, as opposed to being about like learning about social emotional skills. So that's yeah.
Do you have that pamphlet? Could you share it? I'd love to see what.
Let me, I will get it. I can share that out with this group. Our PR person has it. That is not something I wanted to own. So our PR person has it, and I can, I'll ask her and I'll scan a copy over. Yeah, because I won't be at next Thursday's meeting. So yeah, it's a long list of things, but SEL is right there in the mix. So absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Even in Sherwood, I mean, we pushed out our culture of care at the elementary level 5 years ago now. And parents loved it. There were never concerns. We taught it virtually live over, distance learning last year. And we have had, just in the last, I would say like 18 months with everything going on in the community, we have had a number of parents reach out, kind of making the same claims, Kate, as what you were saying, with their idea of what SEL is. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. Like I said, even in a community where like we can give our teachers a wellness day, we still have a group that pushes back. And so I would imagine it's going to be the same, even in these communities that have been doing this work. And it is like well developed. You're still always going to have those pockets of people that are, I'll say, questioning it. I was going to say sometimes it feels like it's attacking the work, but I guess questioning and pushing back on it, and helping maybe those more conservative districts around how do you address that and what's in place for that pushback.
I would add, that's like an aspiration I have. I was thinking about it as like an optimistic close, but I also feel like my hope is that with with clear standard, all of this stuff across the board, it's so much easier to educate people on what SEL is. So it's really easy to point to, well, this is what SEL is. Like, I'm not telling your kid anything. They don't, like, teaching your kid any skills. They don't need to be a successful human being in the world. And so that's a hope I have that comes out of this too, because it's not scary. We've been doing it for a long time. It's just one of those hot topics right now. And so I'm really hopeful about that coming out of this, all of this that we're doing.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I was just going to say, thanks for naming that. I think that's the possibility, right? The opportunity. And you're right. We've been doing it forever. We've been talking about what it means to collaborate, right? We've been talking about what it means to share. We've been talking about identities and who we are. So just, I think the potential of the standards is that we can have deeper, more connected, collaborative conversations with each other across the state, which is exciting. Okay, well, I'm loving this conversation. And it's good to kind of just say what's so, right? And just to name our fears. I think that's really important anytime we begin a journey, because that's real. And we want to just check ourselves and attend to that. So I'm happy that they're also posted so we can maybe return to them, you know, as we advance through our own work. And check in on those. So before we move to our last part, which is kind of thinking about next steps already, the next question is really around engagement. And if there's anything that you all think would be beneficial, that you would want input from, that would help us develop standards down the line. Because, so right now, I'll just give a brief summary. The engagement group has, I mean, we only met for an hour and a half, and we're only going to meet for an hour and a half next week. So we have very limited time, but we're looking at two things. So a survey that would be going out, so kind of casting wide, and then having these empathy interviews. So, and the empathy interviews would use, in its current formation, and this was just kind of our initial draft that we wanted to play with, is going to use the TSEL, so transformative SEL competencies. So like Jill was saying, around identity and belonging and agency, all of those are in the middle. And then we would ask families, so caregivers, learners, and then community members, you know, what is a rose for each of this? Like, what is something where that was really cultivated? Because we want to be asset-based and think about where is this happening and what's leading to that nurturing of that rose. And then the other side is a thorn. So what are the things that are like getting in the way from that? When was a time when that didn't happen for you, that you didn't get to talk about, you know, sense of belonging or whatever it may be? So that's our initial thinking. We wanted to also keep it pretty wide. We didn't want to say, hey, what do you all think? What do you all want to see in the SEL standards? We wanted to be really conscientious of what folks know about SEL. So that's kind of our first draft thinking. So thoughts about that, anything that you would want or would be helpful for you all as you think about standards work?
Just to let everybody know, we have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Jim.
I have so many thoughts, but for 1 minute, just how do we get to other populations? Like I know in Portland Public Schools, like our Russian population has a lot of opposition to social emotional learning. And so really finding out from different cultural groups, what are the oppositions, the cultural oppositions to it. I think that would be just my number one. And then also I'm wondering, how are they, and maybe this is a whole group discussion, but how are they identifying who they're going to talk to? Because like Jim was saying, you know, oh, could we have other people on this committee? I think the answer is no. But then it's how do we then, who are they getting? Because like I have people, Jim has people, Kate, so how is there going to be personal outreach or?
So right now, the people are, yes, I think there will be an ask of the larger AG group to go back and then connect with whoever you can connect with. So Jill, it could be some of the Russian communities. It could be some of the people that you really trust and value and want to hear from them. It's going to be all kinds of different folks. And so we have been thinking specifically about culturally specific groups that we want to really make sure we hear from. So we've got someone like homeless, McKinney Viento. We want to hear about students and families that are impacted about because their school is not set up for them to be successful. But we are going to definitely need everyone's support.
Vanessa, I would just add too that as the engagement group develops kind of the plan, that's going to come back to the larger group for input, and we want your eyes on of like where there might be gaps or and I think we also need to make clear like what all are you able to help with and what maybe we might need to kind of fill in some other areas where Vanessa and I might have to do some outreach or some different ways to do it. So I think things will become a little more clear soon. But you all will play a huge part in feedback for that.
Yeah, and Jill, I like your question too. I think just naming, we're using a trauma-informed approach and protocol when we do this. And so just, I think making space for fears and like worries is going to be really important.
Can we ask Kate's cat?
I mean, Kate's cat.
No cares. She is just her support. Yeah.
I wish my cat was like 1% of that. Awesome. Well, maybe percolate on that. And if you think of something that would be helpful, if you could populate it into this box, questions that you have, as things come up, I will return to this before we meet again for our engagement group. So that we can I can just surface that to the team. Can you believe it? There are only 10 minutes left. What happened? This was so lovely. That's what happens when you're having fun. Okay, so next steps. Any thoughts about we're meeting again? Is it next week? Yes, it's next week, next Thursday at this time. So we can think about, do we want to do some pre-work beforehand? And then thinking through what are some agenda items. This is your all's meeting. What would be helpful to talk about?
So just from up above our conversation, I know we talked a lot about like defining SEL and how that would be maybe a good next step, or at least helpful for this group moving forward. So I wonder about that.
Is that something that we as a small group could start on and then kind of, because I know we would want like large group discussion on that, but as this small work group, could we start on it and then as we hear from engagement like that, just be something we then have a starting point for the next big group one?
I mean, that makes sense, only that because also standards doesn't come up until later. So the bucket of work is not as intense until later on. So that could be, right? We can kind of draft that. What do you all think? Thumbs up, Chelsea?
I was just going to say, I almost wonder, is that something that would be worth this group starting to draft? And I feel like we would need to take it back to the larger group and get, I don't want it to be like, oh, here's what we came up with, and then have it affect all of the work they're doing.
So maybe the first step is to bring it up at the February 28th AG group as an ask, right? If that's a worthy thing to explore.
I think my only thought too, and I am, it may just be me thinking this way too, is that it's sometimes so much easier to like start from somewhere as opposed to like, let's create this in this huge group setting. But also we don't want to have it narrow, like, because we do need a big group, so we don't want to have it already narrowed and then people don't have any other input. So I think either way we do it. And I liked Jill's idea too in the chat about looking at other standards, again, like revisiting other standards.
Yeah, do any of you have some that that you've heard of or that you're aware of that would be powerful?
I was always impressed with the Illinois standards. I'm also impressed with our own Oregon Department of Education health class standards for social and emotional learning.
So that was something I was gonna ask. So internally, I've met with some of the health and PE folks at ODE, and they're very much of the opinion we are doing that. We're doing SEL. And they are those standards. So I wonder, would it be helpful as a next step to maybe have someone from, because one of the things on the bill language, it says to be integrated, right? So I wonder, would it be helpful to have someone from that team come and kind of share with us where SEL lives in health so that we're clear about what is already happening in our system?
Yeah, because in PPS, that's like the work that we're trying to move is like, how do we integrate with the health standards as well as counselors? Which is a real source of tension between who owns SEL in terms of counselors or MTSS. So maybe it's what is the National Counselor Organization, ASCA or something?
NASCA?
There's the American School Counselor Association. So we do have a set of standards that incorporates the social emotional learning domain. And so we can have school counselors. Kate could probably be able to share. We could share what those are. So there used to be, we used for many years was a different set of standards. And so in 2018, we updated our standards for school counseling programs. And it did away with the detailed types of competencies, indicators, and really just went to kind of like a broad or kind of like a higher level type of standard. And so that we do have standards that are social emotional learning. They just look different. And in the past, school psychologists, school social workers used to use the standards that we had, but then they've now been incorporated in the health, some of them in the health standards in more detail. So it'd be great to just kind of explore that.
And I was thinking the same thing. I was looking up, I was putting in our position statement on SEL because it doesn't give those specific mindsets and behaviors, but it also gives like broader framework for how school counselors support, and then also the mindsets and behaviors. So yeah, those links are in the chat.
Do social workers have standards, SEL standards?
So they don't have adopted standards. They do provide social emotional learning, different tiered approaches to social emotional learning, but they don't have a set of adopted standards like school counselors do, school counseling programs, sorry. But if school social workers now are by law can design, deliver, and implement comprehensive school counseling programs, they should be doing the standards as part of that work or working in collaboration with others to do them.
So if I'm hearing this right, it sounds like we want to hear what is already happening with SEL in Oregon, right? And where are those places where SEL is kind of really a focus or centered? So I think that'll take the bulk of our next time. And then we can pause on the defining SEL until we kind of share out, at our ask at the AG meeting. And then I like the idea of after looking at some states, like Jim mentioned Illinois, I know Massachusetts has some really powerful one as well that are connected with teacher standards as well, which is what is also happening on the TSPC side in Oregon. So I know that's been really powerful for Massachusetts. And then is there any pre-work we need to do before now and our next meeting?
I'll try to read some of those standards. But could you share I was trying to find the link for, I can't say Massachusetts. Could you share with us?
Yeah, I'll put it down here in the next steps. Maybe let's just commit to looking at Illinois and Massachusetts. Does that sound reasonable? And we'll just add the links down there that'll take you straight to the standards, and then we can just talk through what we notice about it. All right, 2 minutes. Perfect time for our optimistic closure. Does anybody have an optimistic closure they want to use today? I guess not. All right, something I'm now thinking, feeling, and or wondering.
I'm glad we had Kate and your cat here today. That was wonderful to see that kind of love going on. Makes me want to go buy a puppy. Absolutely, thanks for the guidance in this work. I'm just feeling very confident and hopeful as we move forward, because I think we discussed some really important things today, and we're able to find some good common ground.
I was just going to echo Jim a little bit. It feels, I think, lots of feelings and thoughts. There's a part of me where I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much, and it feels very overwhelming. But at the same time, I feel like I'm very confident, like we have the right people, and I think we are approaching this the right way. And I think it feels like we're asking the right questions. And I feel confident in moving it forward with this group.
I'd say, I mean, the same thing. We're just like nodding while Jim is talking, and Chelsea too. And also just that feeling of we're finally moving forward, because there's just a lot to take on. And so that feeling of like, okay, we're starting and here we go. It's really exciting. So.
Yeah, ditto with what everybody said. I'm feeling excited and hopeful.
Yeah, and I'm feeling connected, and it's just a pleasure to be in smaller spaces so we can like talk and connect. And I just really appreciate any time we can dialogue and have big conversations. Beth, do you want to share?
Am I next? Oh, sorry. I was trying to capture all the links in the chat. Something. Oh gosh. Thinking, feeling. I just feel like our conversation today is taking me in lots of different directions. So I just need time to like think and process. And I love like putting puzzle pieces together. So I just appreciate the opportunity to hear from all of you and kind of thinking next steps.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we will see you next week. Have a great long weekend and much deserved rest. Take care.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Jill. They're so sweet.
Lovely group.
They're so nice.
Let's stop.
Oh, thank you for
recording.
putting in those standards there.
Yeah. Do you want to stop recording and we'll debrief of next steps?
Yes.